Hello, Chris. What would you like? Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Chris Thomas, a longtime student of Grandmaster George Dillman, and also the one who co-authored with him the books on kyusho-jitsu. So in some ways, I'm the mouthpiece. In English, we might humorously say I'm the spokesmodel for kyusho-jitsu.
So let's start at the beginning. When and why did you start with martial arts?
I started doing martial arts in 1970. Part of it was because I had an older brother who used to beat me up. And also, martial arts was cool back then. Nobody did martial arts. And I thought, wow, it'd be really cool to do karate, like that would be cool, like Kato on the Green Hornet or something. And I walked into a Shotokan dojo ready for my first trial lesson, and it was going to be really cool. And the teacher said, stand like this, and put your foot like this, and hold your hand like this, and put your arm like that. And it was like something else. It wasn't cool. It was, this takes attention, and this takes focus. And it was so interesting to me that's why that's why I kept training. I walked into the dojo to be cool, but I kept training because that first lesson, I thought it was so interesting that I just never got tired of it.
Okay. When and where did you meet George Dillman first time?
So I had started in 1970. I trained Shotokan style. My teacher he's still alive. His name is Robert Fisaro. He's currently 9th Dan, and he was a direct student of Hidetaka Nishiyama sensei. And so very solid Shotokan, very strong Shotokan. And then I had moved from where I lived. I'd moved to another part of the country and couldn't find Shotokan, so I started to study Okinawan Isshinryu. And so now I was doing Okinawan style. I was still practicing Shotokan on my own, but I was doing Okinawan style. And then I moved again and ran into an old dojo mate from years ago when I was a student with Fisaro Sensei. And we were both at a seminar with Danny Inosanto. And so we sort of reconnected, and a few months later, he contacted me and said, I'm bringing George Dillman in for a seminar I thought you might be interested in. Well, I knew who George was now by this time, because what had happened to sort of prime the pump to get me ready for that moment of meeting George Dillman was while I was an Isshinryu practitioner, had borrowed a videotape from a friend of Oyata Sensei, knocking people out. And I remember watching this videotape in my living room, shaking. I knew that was real karate. I knew that I didn't know it, and I was literally shaking, And then I tried to push it out of my mind because it was too much. I trained for so many years, and I didn't know that, and I couldn't bear it. But I'd come to know that Dillman Sensei had learned from Oyata. I had seen some video of Dillman Sensei, and he seemed nicer than Oyata. So I went to the seminar. I brought with me Kohai.
Okay, yes.
And so at that time I was 3rd Dan in Isshinryu. Okay. I had 2nd Dan Shotokan, which I actually had received from Nakayama Sensei, Masatoshi Nakayama. I tested 2nd Dan under him in 1976. I'd gotten my 3rd Dan in Isshinryu in 1986 or 87. So it was, and if I remember correctly, it was September of 1988. But I realized when I try to think back that I'm not sure exactly when it was. But I think it was September of 1988, and we went to the seminar. We walked in the door. Sensei Dillman was literally right inside the door. He looked and he saw that we were Isshinryu. That was his first style, was Isshinryu.
Okay.
So we were like long-lost cousins to him as a result. You do Isshinryu? I said, yes. He said, "You know Seisan kata?" I said, "Yes." He says, "You know this move from Seisan?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know what it's for?" I went, And then he grabbed Kohai and knocked him out. And I thought, I'm in the right place. and I have been Sensei's student ever since that day. That was ever since that day.
Excepting George or Mr. Dillman, what other instructors did you have?
Well, so as you know, I mentioned already Sensei Fisaro,
Yes.
from whom I learned Shotokan. I learned my Ishinryu from Sensei Steve Young. And both of them, Sensei Fisaro is now one of the most senior Western Shotokan practitioners in the world.
Okay.
Ninth Dan right now, I believe. And Sensei Steve Young is the head of a very large Ishinryu organization in the United States. He's also ninth Dan. So I had very good teachers of those styles. So they're the only three people who I can regard as having been sensei to me are Robert Fisaro, Steve Young, George Dillman. But I've had lots of teachers. You know, people who I've trained with who don't even know who I am, right? Ginfun Mark, for example, is a teacher of Southern praying mantis Kung Fu. I wrote an article about him for a magazine called Inside Kung Fu in 1982, I think, which meant I spent maybe a dozen hours with him, interviewing him, taking pictures, stuff like that. I had no idea, understanding what he was doing, but I found that about 5 years later that I was suddenly going, oh, wait, I get that. And I was learning from him 5 years after the fact. Okay. I was learning from him. So I actually consider him a guy who has been a teacher for me, even though he probably has no idea, would not even remember me. I trained with Danny Inosanto a couple times, and when there were, in the course of training with Danny Inosanto, there would be these moments where I'd see something and I'd go, wait, just an idea, like one thing that would really help me. So this happened 2 or 3 times training with Danny Inosanto. I remember, this was before I met George, I remember Danny Inosanto was teaching an arm destruction. The punch comes and you do this. And I looked at it and I went, wait, that's Shuto. You know, and that was like a really important moment because I was starting to think in terms of bunkai. Yes. This helped set the stage that when I met Sensei Dillman and he was doing bunkai, you know, I was already starting to think that way, in part thanks to Danny Inosanto. And just a lot of people for whom I trained, I learned maybe one really important thing. Master Nick Adler told me one thing about Asai Kata that really turned out later to be incredibly important when I started taking that idea and expanding on it and you know, working through it. So a lot of people who are teachers but not sensei.
Okay. So Chris, let's talk about the books. George and you have produced 7+ books, right?
Yes.
What's your favorite book and why?
Which is my favorite?
Yeah.
The next one.
Okay.
Seriously, it's always the next one. Because for me, writing the books is also training.
Okay.
That's part of the reason why I wrote the books, was not to have a book, but because I knew it would help me train. It would help me focus my understanding and my technique as I was trying to write about it. It made me, it's a little bit like this saying, the one who teaches learns twice. Have you ever heard this saying?
Well, not in English, but...
So this idea that the writing was actually part of the thing that helped me learn. So each book is a chance to sort of do that, to learn more, to expand more. Now, our most recent book, which is Pressure Point Fighting Secrets of Rikyu Kempo, is an interesting book because I do really appreciate that one because it represents actually the growth of kyusho-jitsu. Because it's what happened was our first 3 books we published the old-fashioned way.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we could no longer reprint the second book. We had no way of reprinting it, and I had to literally go back to all of the original data, the original photographs. Actually, I had to go back and find the original negatives and the original electronic text just of the writing and reassemble it if we were going to print it again. Well, I thought, well, why should we just redo the book when we've progressed? So I took what we call book 2, the Rikyu Kempo book, and we added all of this material, new stuff, more deeper understanding. The techniques that we would add to the description of the techniques, more information about what we were doing and why it worked. And so for me it represents, you can really see like 20 years of growth in kyusho-jitsu kind of hiding in that one book. If you're looking carefully, you can see plus 20 years of growth around the belly. So yes, I really like that book, but it's the one I'm working on now that is my favorite.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as you said, there are a lot of information in the books.
Yes.
So, what do you think? How people should use the information? Just reading the books and studying it, or step on the mat and do the stuff?
There are a lot of, the term is moshibushi, mouth warriors?
Yes.
Yes. Who like to talk big or like to get on the computer.
Yes, yes, yes.
But that's why I always say, thanks for reading, now go train, or
Yes.
thanks for watching, now go train. Because it doesn't matter how much you know up here if you can't put it on the floor. That's where the truth is. The truth is on the floor. My experience has been that the better I understand, the better I'm able to do a technique. So for me, understanding and performance are linked. So not everybody's that way. There are a lot of people who don't need to understand. They just go, oh, if I do this, it works. And then they just do it and they're happy. Here's what I would say. If you read the book, don't pay attention to the techniques. Pay attention to the principles. Because if you learn a technique and perfect a technique, you have a technique.
Yes.
But if you learn a technique and you understand the principles of that technique, you now have 1,000 techniques. And that's the most valuable thing, to have all of those techniques. I mean, I've literally run into people who learned a technique from some great master, and then they kept it like a little secret, that they never shared it, but they also never applied the principles or understood it. It was just like, ooh, I have a special technique that nobody else has, I'm important.
Yes.
And that is not, you read the books, understand the principles, don't worry about the techniques, do the principles. Now, for teachers, the books can be used as curriculum. So the book is the textbook, and in class the students train the techniques, and then they can use the books as to reference and to understand better. And so this is a really good way for teachers to use the material. For the individual practitioner who's maybe not teaching kyusho-jitsu, or is sort of trying to apply it to their own art, then the method is to understand the principles and apply it to whatever you do. It's best not to try to do somebody else's art. Everybody tries to imitate somebody else. They want to be the next Bruce Lee, and so they try to do Bruce Lee's art, or they try to, try to become Sensei Dilman. You can't. I do my techniques differently than Sensei Dilman does. You have to be your own martial artist, and the way you do that is you understand the principle and apply it to your art. The principles are consistent, and we might say absolute, but you're an individual.
Yes.
And so the principle applied to you is recognizable, but there may be things about how you do it that are unique to you, and that's how it should be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yes. Do you believe kyusho changed in the last 30 years?
Has kyusho changed? We understand it better. We have what happens was originally, so years ago, people understood kyusho-jitsu, but they kept it secret. I'll teach you a little bit, but they won't teach very much. I had a conversation with a man who was a senior student of Shogo Kuniba. Kuniba sensei was in the line of Shitoru, and very important. His father had been a very important karate master, and there was a very large Shitoru organization that was their organization. And his father died. He becomes the next Soke, very knowledgeable. Eventually lived in the United States, and I had a conversation with his most senior student after he died. Sensei Kuniba died in the 90s. And the conversation, I asked about kyusho-jitsu. Did he ever teach you kyusho-jitsu? And what the student said was, well, in the last few months before he died, did you catch that? In the last few months before he died, he started to teach me about, and then he was describing some of the things, like using two sides of the body and this kind of thing. And it was everything that I was hearing was stuff that we knew, that we were familiar with. Similarly, I have a letter written by, I mentioned Jin-Fun Mark, the Southern Praying Mantis teacher. I had a letter written by one of his most senior students that said, literally, the letter said, Sifu taught me the 108 dim mak form, but decided to take the application to the grave with him. So he knows the movements, but not what they're for. So what happened was people had the kyusho-jitsu, and they lost it because people were keeping it a secret and just passing it on really privately and really quietly. Once Sensei Dillman blabbed, let the cat out of the bag, spoke the secret, and did what he did, which is shared everything he knew. He always shares everything he knows. Once he did that, then, see, if I share knowledge, and then I give you permission to research, then you take that knowledge and you expand on it. And then you bring that back to me, and I go, oh. And then I take what you've learned and add more to it. And then, so the art is the same but deeper.
Okay.
We're using the same points, but we understand them better. When we first began, we knew that you use points together, but we didn't quite know the rules of how to use the points together. We were just learning that. We knew that they were the same points used in acupuncture, and so literally right when I was meeting Sensei Dillman was when we were all poring over the acupuncture books. He himself had first looked at the anatomy books to see how the nerves went, so he was very interested in that. We started poring over the acupuncture books, so he was looking at the nerves, which tell you how the points work, area control, the individual component. The acupuncture describes how one point relates to another point. And we started combining these two pieces of information. And Sensei right away, I mean, he was always, these are the same points used in acupuncture. And he'd point us to Funakoshi's book, yes, which says, these are the same points used in acupuncture. Actually, he uses the term moxibustion, but it means acupuncture. These are the same points used in acupuncture. Sensei Dillman had been in Japan once and received a set of instructional manual, little instructional pamphlets. They were very interesting, but one of them was about pressure points. Okay. And I have copies of that, and I brought it to someone who could read Japanese, and they said, oh, it's entitled 88 pressure, it was something like learn 70 pressure points, it was learn 88 pressure points in 70 days. So it was like a home study course. But I started looking at it and comparing it with my acupuncture charts, and I could recognize, oh, look, it says Heart 7 right there. It says, it was like naming the exact same points. So has it changed? Our understanding is much deeper. We know things that we just didn't know before. Okay. But we're still using the same points. We're still applying, lung 8 is still a rub point. That hasn't changed,
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Especially in Germany and Europe. Over the last years, there are more and more different kyusho organizations. We have 5 to 8 dans. Nobody ever heard from them before,
Yeah.
A couple of self-titled kyusho-jitsu instructors and a lot of representatives from DKI, other organizations. What do you think about all that?
Politics. It's politics and money. No kyusho-jitsu exists in Europe apart from Sensei Dillman. That we just start with that. Everyone who claims to be knowledgeable, their knowledge always has Dillman in there somewhere. Or one of his direct students. So, I understand that there's a lot of political stuff in martial arts, national politics, like actual governmental politics, and so that affects how it works in Europe differently than the United States. In the United States, we don't have that many kyusho-jitsu organizations.
Yes.
There are like 2, or 3. I mean, we have Dillman, and that's pretty much it. And then you don't hear much in the United States from Evan Pentazzi and his Kyusho International. And Jim Korn by the way, Jim Korn is a guy I have great respect for and a good friend. Dearly miss having him in DKI. I think he was one of Sensei Doman's best students, and just a really nice guy. And so we felt really heartbroken when he left the organization. And but he just has a little dojo where he lives in the States. And so in the United States, it's pretty much kyusho-jitsu. It's pretty much George Dillman. It's DKI. Nobody really talks about any other group. And pretty much the understanding that everyone has is if you want to learn Kyusho, you have to talk to one of Dillman's people. So our problems are internal in terms of DKI in the States. And here it's all of this competition with these different groups, everyone claiming that they know something. And a lot of them pretending they didn't get it from him, which I find a little troubling. The very first things, when I met Sensei Dillman right from the beginning, from the very first, he always gave credit to where he learned things. He always said, I learned this from Hohan Soken. He said, I learned this from Seiwa Yada. He was always giving credit. And he always said to us, you can share what you learned from me. Just always be honest about where you learned it. Just give credit where credit is due. And so it's troubling when people pretend that they're, I learned it from my teacher over here, when they in fact learned it from Dillman. Or they act like they knew it all along, when they learned it from Dillman. And I find that frustrating. The other thing, of course, that happens is you get a lack of quality, you get people self-promoting. Again, that to me is what the mat is for. Okay, if you're really good, come and show us on the mat. Not in a secret seminar where, I'm sorry, you have to pay lots of money, and now you can only come for the morning because you're just a beginner. You don't get to see the secret stuff we do in the afternoon. Let's open it up, just like we do here. You come, everybody's welcome. And if you're just a beginner, we don't make you leave when we talk about the advanced stuff. We just ask you to not worry about it, But you get to see it. You can actually judge for yourself. Is this any good? Is this real? Is this valuable? Does this teacher know anything? Can I learn this? There's no, only the Grandmaster can do this. He's the only one. Our feeling is everyone can do this. You don't actually have to train for 30 years to do this. You just have to learn to do it correctly. And so my problems with all of these groups is the way in which their agenda is not openly sharing kyusho-jitsu, but making themselves more important. People like that I have trouble with. Any group in your list, if they're actually really interested in sharing good quality kyusho-jitsu and helping to spread that information to others, and they're doing it well, then they're my friends. I like them. Whoever they are, I like them.
Okay. What about giving Dan ranks out, what about the graduating politics?
Yeah.
It's not just giving the rank out. It's about the technical standard,
Yeah. It's been complicated. It's complicated in the United States, which is why I advocate having a board exam that everyone takes as a way of making sure everyone goes through some kind of central common quality control point. I think there should be at least 2 of those. I think there should be one at 4th or 5th dan, and there should be one at 7th dan. That's my personal feeling. And that is what I do with my own students. And would I like to see that be DKI wide? And do I think it would benefit DKI if it was? Yes. Will it happen? Probably not. But I'll keep doing it with my people and with anyone else who wants to come before a board that I set up and just say, yes, let me see if I got this stuff.
Well, that's a good solution, I think. Yeah, that sounds good.
It's at least a start.
Yeah. Well. Do you remember when and why DKI has begun to change the or use the traditional Chinese medicine
Language.
Language instead of the modern Western medicine.
So when you talk about 1 point, 1 point only, what we call area control,
yes.
then you have to talk about Western medicine. You have to
Right.
you have to use that model, because now you're talking about a nerve, you're talking about a tendon receptor, you're talking about a body of Golgi's, you're talking about a fusiform fiber, you're talking about things like the way in which nerves send signals and how long that takes to move through the body and all of that stuff. And you have to have that information and you have to have that knowledge. When Sensei Dillman got into pressure points, he started reading a book, a medical textbook on physiology. Now, this is a guy who didn't read much, poring over a medical textbook. And I've seen he's gone through actually more than one copy of this book. Dog-eared, corners folded, highlighted, notes. And one of his longtime students went to medical school and said, come to the anatomy class. And they would look at cadavers and trace the nerves. So he really understood that if you knew the point from the perspective of Western anatomy, that mechanical piece of it, you could make that point work better because you understood how the nerves moved and you could know how to attack them. The problem is, Western medicine cannot explain why kicking you in spleen 6 makes you vulnerable over here. Yes. It can't. It doesn't have a language to describe those relationships. What traditional Chinese medicine is a language of relationships. So what that does is that gives us the algorithm, the predictive tool that says, if I kick you there, I'm probably going to make you vulnerable over here. And that enables us to anticipate what the next target is going to be. So I know when I hit you, I can anticipate the next kinds of targets that are come out. Makes it easier for me to hit them because I know where to look. But you can get rid of all of that and just do this, what I call pressure points for dummies, which is if you attack a point, something hides, something else comes out, hit what comes out. And then you're done, So that's kind of the easy way to do it. But I think understanding it has really helped us. It's deepened our knowledge. If it wasn't for doing the TCM, we would never have been able to connect it to stance, to structure, to energetics flow, to the myriad of things that have deepened our art and made it more effective are connected to the ways in which we started looking at it from more than one point of view. If I look through this lens, I see this nerve, and I see this tendon, and I see this muscle, and I see this thing. That's superb. Now I'm going to change the lens. Now I see this relationship. I see this combination. I see this other thing. And it's just made our art much deeper, much stronger, and much better. I personally believe that maybe at no time in history, but certainly not for probably 200 years, has the art of pressure point fighting been at such a high level. I actually think it's at a much higher level than it's ever been before. Whoa. Everyone kept it a secret. Yes. For the first time it's open and everyone's sharing. Our whole level of knowledge has risen. We understand it far better. When I read now old books on kyusho-jitsu, I literally think how quaint they are. Do you know this word, quaint?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's so cute. How adorable. They knew a couple of pressure points, because they lost so much information that we've been sort of recovering over here. So I personally think that, I think at least 200 years, certainly for 100 years, but I think it's been longer since there's been this kind of really deep understanding of pressure points anywhere in the world. I think it's just been an explosion of information.
Okay, so you think it makes sense to study both?
Yes, absolutely.
Traditional Chinese medicine and modern Western medicine.
If you walk into my library, you will see 3 or 4 books on anatomy, including specifically books that are like photos of corpses, where they're the anatomical books where they take pictures of dead bodies. And then you'll find 3 or 4 really good books on acupuncture. And they're side by side, and I have poured over them all. And on top of that, I've literally gone to medical libraries and looked things up to understand things. like the what's called the oculocardiac reflex. I had to find that in a book on anesthesiology.
Okay.
Yes, yes. It's the relationship between the eye and the heart.
Oh, okay.
Acupuncture says there's a relationship between the eye and the heart. I literally I went to the medical library at the university in my town, the medical school. I went to their library. I went in and I found books on anesthesia, and I found this. This is pre-internet, you know. I was having to do it the old-fashioned way, you know.
Okay.
And I mean, but this is what we've done, and I think it's very important. The more the more you can look at things from different perspectives, the better you can understand it.
Then my next question, Chris, do you have any special technique or knockout or point?
Favorite technique?
Yeah.
This favorite technique time.
Okay, yes.
Yes, sure. We'll be happy to share that with you.
Would you like to demonstrate this on me?
Okay. So a principle of bunkai is that most of the work in bunkai is done in the middle of the technique. So in a kata like the kata Seisan kata, which begins with this move, middle counter, that means that most of the work is done here, and this is the backup. This is the what if I mess up that middle part.
Yes.
And whereas what most people imagine is the work is done at the end. So it's really in the middle. So this technique is very, very simple. It's going to involve the legs, the hand here, and the hand here. So this is considered the intermediate or setting position. This is where all the things happen. The principle we're going to follow will be the cycle of destruction. We're going to go from fire, metal, and then down into wood. Okay. So the points we're using are triple warmer 17. On the arm, it'll be either lung 5 or lung 10. I'm not fussy. And then on the leg, it's deep in to get liver 9.
Okay.
So the situation is, you've got this leg forward because you're grabbing me.
Okay.
And so it's always because you're grabbing me this way. And so and yes, there's the threat. So normally, you know, you'd be like this. But what we do instead is we're going to come in striking here, and striking here. And we just kind of do that simultaneously, right? Like this. So the general rule on revival is first if you've done a knockout that involves striking the head, the wake up is on the side opposite from the hit. So I hit you on the right side, so I use the nerve on the left side. Then you push up along the bladder and governor meridians to drive chi into the head, which is how you wake up the head. But if you leave the chi there, you get a headache. Because the flow of energy is actually this way. So then you have to basically move it back in the right direction so that the person has a better recovery. You want someone to feel a little better after they've been knocked out. Not when, okay, let me rephrase that. You want them to feel better after they've been revived from a knockout, maybe than they felt before you knocked them out. It's also valuable when reviving somebody to kind of run down the bladder meridian and just make sure there's not a spot of tension or even a place where it kind of balls up. If you find one of those, sometimes you kind of have to hit them to kind of get the chi to move. It just means that that's a place where the chi is stuck. It also helps to, you know, like the people that you're knocking out. Because if you like them, they're less likely to get hurt because you're less interested in hurting them.
Thank you very much for the interview. And is there anything you would like to announce? The last word is yours.
Sure. Thanks for watching. Now go train.